Poor Nietzsche, his ideas are slowly being hijacked by the grind-set Sigma male hustle crowd, like the Stoics. They've had their philosophy twisted into some cringy work harder, rise and grind nonsense. But here's the thing, Nietzsche would have hated hustle culture. The whole grind-set mindset, it's exactly what he warned us about. Let's break down what Nietzsche actually meant and why hustle culture completely misses the point. Hustle culture. It's everywhere. Those Instagram posts about grinding 24/7, YouTube gurus shouting at you to outwork everyone, and podcasts insisting that sleep is for the weak. The message is always the same. Your worth comes down to how much you produce, how busy you are, and how hard you push yourself. At its core, hustle culture is obsessed with constant productivity. It glorifies working endless hours, skipping rest, and chasing those shiny markers of success, whether it's money, fame, or hitting the next big career milestone. The takeaway: if you're not grinding, you're falling behind. It's no wonder this mindset thrives today. Scroll through social media and you're bombarded with people winning. Founders building billion-dollar companies, influencers hustling non-stop, and self-improvement goblins who make it seem like success is just one more 5 a.m. wake-up away. The pressure to keep up is relentless. And what do we get in return? Burnout, anxiety, and that nagging feeling that we're never enough. But here's the kicker. Hustle culture doesn't just demand that we work harder, it demands that we conform, that we chase someone else's version of success, instead of figuring out what success means to us. And this is where Nietzsche steps in. See, Nietzsche was all about rejecting the herd mentality, the idea of blindly following the crowd. But funny enough, he's one of the most misunderstood philosophers out there. Now, I get it. It's kind of hilarious to misquote Nietzsche just to trigger philosophy tryhards. But the hustle culture crowd, they're not trolling, they genuinely get him wrong. And honestly, hustle culture is just one example in a much bigger pattern of people missing the mark with Nietzsche. And these misinterpretations of his ideas are perfect examples of something he couldn't stand, turning complex, transformative ideas into shallow, surface-level nonsense. But here's where things get complicated. Hustle culture's version of Nietzsche, the one that's all about grinding for power and success, kind of overlaps, at first glance, with one of his most famous ideas, the will to power. And that's what makes their misreading so convincing. The irony? Most of them probably don't even know will to power exists, but somehow their entire take on Nietzsche still echoes a warped, distorted version of it. So what is will to power? And why is it so easy to twist it into something Nietzsche never intended? Let's break it down. Before we delve into Nietzsche's will to power, consider subscribing, it helps me keep going. To really get what Nietzsche's will to power is about, you've got to understand what he was pushing back against. As James Porter, a scholar who spent a lot of time unpacking Nietzsche's tricky ideas, explains, Nietzsche wasn't trying to come up with some rigid philosophy or a set of rules. Instead, he was rejecting the big ideas that had shaped Western thought for centuries. Think of Plato and his belief in eternal, unchanging truths, ideas that supposedly defined how the world should work. Or Kant, who came up with these universal moral laws that were supposed to be applied to everyone equally. To Nietzsche, these ideas felt way too rigid, like they were trying to force life into a neat little box. He thought that they oversimplified life, stripping it of its chaos and unpredictability. Nietzsche didn't think life should be about following some pre-made plan. For him, it was about growing, changing, and constantly challenging yourself to go beyond the status quo. Porter explains that Nietzsche wanted to replace these static, lifeless systems with something alive, something that embraced struggle and transformation. And that's where will to power comes in. Nietzsche wasn't handing us a perfectly wrapped answer to life's big questions. Instead, he gave us this open-ended idea, something that sees life as a constant process of growth and reinvention. Porter even points out that most of what we know about will to power comes from Nietzsche's unpublished notes, which is one reason it's so hard to pin down. We'll dig into that ambiguity later, but first, let's break down these ideas that make will to power so important. Nietzsche didn't see the world as a bunch of fixed, separate pieces. He imagined it as a constantly shifting web of energy and connections, what Porter describes as force centers. And these force centers aren't static, they're always moving, clashing, adapting, and evolving. It's a vision of reality that feels alive, where everything influences and reshapes everything else. Picture a busy city intersection. Each car moves on its own, but it's constantly reacting to everything around it, slowing down, speeding up, adjusting course. The traffic flows not because one car dominates the road, but because of how they all interact and adapt. That's how Nietzsche's force centers work. They grow and change through these interactions, shaping and being shaped by the forces around them. Now, compare this with some aspects of hustle culture. Parts of hustle culture talk about personal growth or being your own boss, but often the message still emphasizes dominance. Crush the competition, outwork everyone, dominate the game. Nietzsche's force centers don't aim to crush or win. They thrive through interplay, mutual influence, and evolution. For him, it's the constant push and pull of engaging with the world that fuels real transformation. Hustle culture tends to flatten everything into a zero-sum game. Someone wins, someone loses. Nietzsche believed this misses the richness and complexity of life. Real strength, for him, isn't about standing alone at the top or beating others. It's about creating something greater through your interactions with the world. It's about engaging with challenges, growing through them, and finding meaning in the process. At its heart, will to power is the energy that drives everything to grow, change, and create. Porter calls it the pulse of life, the force that keeps everything moving, from the tiniest organism to the entire universe. And it's not just about survival, it's about constantly evolving and reinventing. For Nietzsche, power isn't about dominating others or chasing superficial achievements, it's about confronting challenges and using them to grow. Think of an artist pushing themselves to explore uncharted territory in their work, or someone facing a deep fear and emerging stronger on the other side. These moments of transformation, that's will to power in action. Now, compare that to hustle culture. Hustle culture is all about external validation, chasing money, status, or recognition to feel like you've made it. But Nietzsche saw this obsession with outside approval as shallow and ultimately unfulfilling. True strength, as Porter explains, comes from within, from having the courage to confront your own limits, break through them, and create something truly your own. Will to power is about creativity and self-overcoming. It's about rejecting the idea that life has to follow a pre-written script and instead forging your own path. Nietzsche's philosophy isn't about fitting into a mold, it's about breaking it apart and shaping life on your own terms. Sure, it's unpredictable and messy, but that's where the meaning lies. Now, we come to one of the trickiest and most fascinating things about will to power. It's intentionally vague. As Porter explains, Nietzsche never fully defined it, and that wasn't a mistake or oversight. He did it on purpose. Why? Because life itself isn't neat or easy to pin down. It's messy, chaotic, and always changing, and Nietzsche thought his philosophy should reflect that. By keeping will to power open-ended, Nietzsche was making a statement. He believed that rigid systems, whether metaphysical or moral, don't help us grow. In fact, they do the opposite. They box us in and stop us from evolving. Porter notes that Nietzsche wanted will to power to spark thought, challenge the way we see things, and push us to face uncertainty head-on, instead of hiding behind comforting, one-size-fits-all answers. But here's the catch. Because it's so open-ended, will to power is also easy to misinterpret. Many people have twisted it into something Nietzsche never intended. The so-called hustlers use it as a justification for relentless grinding and chasing shallow markers of success. But Nietzsche wasn't about that at all. For him, life wasn't a competition, it was a creative process. Will to power isn't about working harder or longer, it's about breaking through your own limits, stepping away from societal norms, and building something meaningful. This openness is what makes Nietzsche's philosophy so powerful. He doesn't hand us a step-by-step guide. Instead, he asks us to wrestle with the big questions ourselves. What does it mean to grow, to overcome, to create? Nietzsche didn't want to spoon-feed us answers. He wanted us to create our own. So maybe it's time to stop following someone else's rules for success. Maybe it's time to embrace the chaos, the struggle, and the uncertainty that comes with forging your own path. Maybe it's time to stop the grind. If Nietzsche taught us anything, it's to embrace creativity and challenge fear. But Hitler, he feared modern art so much he tried to destroy it. Curious why? Check out my other video on the Degenerate Art Exhibition. It's a wild story you don't want to miss.